point in video games where some long-running series are up to their 8th, 9th, or 10th iterations. One of these is Assassin's Creed, which has not one, but 2 games coming out this week. 3 if you include Assassin's Creed Chronicles China, which is coming within the Unity Season Pass. Franchises are an obvious attraction for major publishers as a reliable source of revenue. Big names like Assassin's Creed and Call of Duty have capitalized on this revenue with regular annual releases. But it's not always easy to keep things new and fresh. Sometimes franchises will tweak a formula in a way that will hugely disappoint, like Resident Evil 6. But sometimes they constantly change and constantly shine through, like Mario Galaxy and Super Mario 3D World. Obviously, all of this is hugely subjective, but here are some things I think work really well to keep a franchise feeling fresh. First off, location. A change of scenery is a pretty good and common way to get players to return to your franchise. With the exception of the Ezio trilogy, Assassin's Creed pretty much does this every year. The latest location has you leaving the open seas of the Caribbean for traversing revolutionary France. Games like Far Cry and The Elder Scrolls change up the regions and provinces you can explore with each installment. But this also happens in games without open worlds. Mass Effect and Knights of the Old Republic put emphasis on visiting new planets and galaxies with each new title. And in the case of competitive games like Worms, Street Fighter, and Smash Brothers, the location and theme of the stages, filled with all sorts of weird and wonderful touches, are always a big deal. BioShock took itself from under the sea to up in the clouds. Uncharted took itself from jungle to snow to desert. And Diablo went from hell to, okay, bad example. But a drastic location change is a great way of keeping a good game interesting without sacrificing too many familiar core mechanics. Some games decide to alter not just the location, but also the time period, so that shooting dudes or stabbing them doesn't feel too samey. Take Battlefield, for example, which often changes up its historical period. The shooter series has featured installments that take place in World War II, all the way to the distant future, and everything in between. The stuff that makes the game recognizably Battlefield is still there, but the altered setting allows the environment, weapons, vehicles, and combat mechanics to undergo interesting transformations. Heading further down the narrative rabbit hole is a great reason to stick with a story-driven franchise, but there's also a lot to be said for evolving mechanics. Mass Effect is a really good example of a game that adapted a lot over the course of its trilogy to keep up with its growing fan base. I personally preferred when it was a bit more complex and more like a traditional RPG with a dense skill assignment feature in Mass Effect 1, but others like the way BioWare committed to giving the action more focus in its sequels, since, you know, the combat is all about shooting space guns. Some people were even weird enough to fall in love with the competitive multiplayer in 3. We've seen games like Mario Brothers spearhead technological changes, jumping into 3D and introducing the analog stick with Super Mario 64, implementing analog triggers in a big way with the flood water pump in Super Mario Sunshine, and perspective puzzles in Super Mario 3D World on the 3DS. We've also seen stuff like Spec Ops change up its realistic military shooter roots to adopt a daring new narrative-focused direction with its 11th installment in 2012, Spec Ops: The Line. Whether a franchise decides to differentiate itself from the trends or go with them, it's interesting to see how a series carves out its narrative and mechanical footing over the course of several games, in the interests of keeping things interesting. And if all else fails and your franchise is getting dangerously stale, there's always space. Oh yeah, Civilization, Mario Galaxy, that one Call of Duty level in Ghosts everyone loved, Lego Batman 3, Angry Birds. As always, space seems to be the answer. That was a joke, sort of. Let me know down in the comments which franchise you think is still killing it after all this time, and which franchise you reckon we should probably kill off and forget about. I will see you next week.